Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and when you're watching this. I hope wherever and whenever that is, that you and yours are healthy and safe and following all the public health guidelines to stay that way. This is History 352, Lesson 28, our course conclusion. And though you don't know this, this is my third attempt to record this video. I have had dogs, I've had kids, I've had interruptions galore, though to be fair, one of those interruptions did result in me getting the last of the mint chocolate chip ice cream, so I can't complain too loudly, but it's really not that. I keep going off the rails on this video because it's a hard one to do. It's the end of the semester, it's our last class period, and that's always been kind of something special for me. A chance to wrap things up intellectually, but also as a community, as our little community of the class, and I find I'm really missing and mourning the opportunity to do that. So having said that, maybe I'll be able to muscle on through this video now. So we'll find out. Anyway, Lesson 28, our course conclusion. And if you're following along with the slides, we're about to move over to the course administration slide. Not a lot new here today, just a couple of notes on turning things in. Blackboard has been special the last couple of days. I haven't gotten any grading done. No, that's not entirely true. I've graded one paper 5 times. And every time I grade it and try to post the grade, Blackboard crashes and loses the work I've done. So I sympathize if you're struggling to get things uploaded, if you're struggling to get onto the discussion boards to ask your questions. We'll just do our best. Okay, get things in when you can. I will understand that they may not be exactly on time. Same thing for those of you who are catching up and doing some of our past projects, past papers. Keep on it. Keep posting things. I will grade them as soon as I possibly can, which will be as soon as Blackboard allows me to. Everything else is... I highlighted Congress Comes to You, this upcoming event, because I've had it up there before, but I can't remember if I told you about it or not. But anyway, a definite opportunity to hear from leaders on both sides of the aisle about some practical solutions to some of the problems we face. So perhaps worth your time and effort if you need a little something different during your finals week. Moving on to the jobs. This is a neat one. Not only is the money good, but it's a fascinating project. What they're doing is they're drawing together various historical sites that are related to the Underground Railroad into the Network to Freedom program. So that's a great idea. That really is. Excuse me, to bring all those together. And wow, I don't know who came up with that, but it's a really good idea. And you have a chance to be a part of it. And that's pretty exciting. Worth taking a look at. All right, your writing tip for the day is pretty straightforward. It comes from Benjamin Franklin. Either write something worth reading or do something worth writing. And it's my hope that in your lives, you'll do a little of both. A little of both. All right, Europe, Emergence, Empire, Evolution. Now, normally in a lesson like this, I would spend a lot of time asking you questions. I would be asking you to think back over the course of the whole semester, and we'll do a little bit of integration. Obviously, I can't do that in person, but I do look forward to your questions and comments on the discussion board. So I'm going to keep this short, or at least I'm going to try to, by hitting some of the highlights of at least where I was going with this when I set out to write this course a long time ago. But before we get too far into that, we can look at Europe a lot of ways. We've looked at as flags, as mailboxes. How about stereotypes? I try to keep our last lesson a little lighthearted. So go ahead and examine Europe through the lens of stereotypes. It's moderately amusing and only mildly offensive. All right, welcome back. The essential questions that I wanted to deal with in a lesson like this are to go back to the very beginning. We started off the semester by asking ourselves what Europe was. And we talked about it in terms of geography, in terms of culture, in terms of politics. But in a sense, all that gets wrapped up in the idea of identity. And what I mean by that is to take a page from our understanding of nationalism and the nation as an imagined community. And I think we can make an effective argument at this point that Europe has become an imagined community as well. Um, we don't exactly yet know where that community is going to go. We do know that there is definitely a sense of being European, whether that identity overlays or even overcomes the national identities of various European peoples, we just don't know yet. But even looking in from the outside, we can say there's definitely something about being European. There's something identifiable as European. But again, like the nation, it lies in the realm of imagination, perhaps an agreed upon imaginary construct. So it's more than the geography, and if nothing else, the geography of Europe is kind of difficult to comprehend anyway. On the one hand, it's fairly straightforward to look at this peninsula of peninsulas and associated islands. But on the other hand, because we draw our idea of Europe from the Greeks, and when the Greeks looked at the territory around them, they essentially said, okay, that's Europe, that's Asia, and that over there is Africa. Without a lot of regard for how those lands might connect. And so we understand, intellectually at least, that Europe and Asia are certainly not separate continents. The Urals as a dividing line is a geographic joke. So Europe isn't a continent, but it is. Russia is part of Europe or not, depending from time to time. Even the British can't seem to decide if they're European or not, depending on the moment. So our understanding of what Europe is, what it was, and how it's changed over time, in many ways lies in the realm of the imagination, as opposed to the realm of politics or religion or cultural society, things like that. What differentiates Europe from other regions of the world is, I think, precisely that sense of Europeanness, that idea of being European, that no matter how subdivided the continent may be between various nationalities and various states, it doesn't mean that there's not something in common there. And here perhaps we can identify it. I'm going to yawn, I apologize. Beg your pardon. Mid-afternoon lull. All right. But if we're going to talk about what differentiates Europe from the rest of the world, what sets it apart, the first thing we sort of need to do is make sure we firmly rejected some rather outdated theories that are all based not just on the difference of Europe, but the superiority of Europe. Those ideas could be based on religion, they could be based on technology, often based on race. Europe is better than the rest of the world because it's whiter than the rest of the world. But hopefully at this point in the class, we recognize that none of that's correct. For most of human history, Europe has not been ahead of anybody on anything, essentially. No matter how you want to rank the peoples of the world or rate them or compare them. In fact, we know that for the most part, it's actually been East Asia, China, that has been the world's most populous, most advanced, most culturally advanced, most technologically advanced, wealthiest part of the world. And Europe has been the edge of nowhere. It is only Europeans' intense desire to get to the riches of riches of Asia. Say that 3 times quickly. Did you? Good. Okay. It was only the European desire to get to the riches of Asia that enabled Europeans to turn the oceans from barriers to travel and communications into the highways of their times. Now, that's not an unimpressive feat, but it's always worth remembering that the inspiration from it came from a sense of backwardness and inferiority, not from a sense of superiority. This leads us sort of into our understanding of what historian John Darwin has called the Eurasian Revolution, the transfer of the center of wealth and power from East Asia, China, to Europe, which took place in the 19th century. And remember that Darwin argues that it's not only the European mastery of the winds and waves, but also the Industrial Revolution. And here it is also important to note that many aspects, in fact, probably the most important aspects of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution took place because of European concerns about competition from Asia. So in opening up excuse me, in opening up trade between Europe and India via the ocean trade routes, Europeans exposed themselves to the competition of the vastly superior Indian textile industry. And again, just like how exploring the winds and waves was an act of desperation, in many ways industrialization is as well. The need to compete with the vastly superior textile industry of India. And then finally, as Darwin reminds us, with the conclusion of the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, Europe enters a century of peace. It's not to say all of Europe is at peace all the same time, far from it. There are many, many wars between 1850 and 1914, but there are no general wars in Europe, no great wars that draw in all of the European powers at once. And those three things put together, the mastery of the winds and waves, the Industrial Revolution, and relative peace in Europe, allow Europeans to spread out to develop the first global empires, even though they are not permanent empires, and to shift the balance of power, of trade, of wealth from China to Europe for the first time. And that is to say, if we're going to understand that process for maybe a differentiation of Europe, what makes Europe stand out is that it makes Europe the center of the world, at least according to the maps, and in a sense of oceanic trade, the center of the world, taking that title away from China that had long called itself the Middle Kingdom. And to be fair, the Chinese, they pretty much were for millennia. The European upstarts were a relatively recent and short-lived world center population. We can also make an argument that Europeans founded a set of civilizational principles that we can refer to as the West, and the Europeans have definitely created a series of successor societies around the world based on their former colonies, so places like Canada, the United States, South Africa, Argentina, Latin America in general, though much more of a blended place. Argentina I bring up specifically because it's the most European of Latin American countries, and Australia and New Zealand. All right, enough speculation on that point, or at least enough discussion. One of the things that historians are sometimes loath to do is to look ahead. We're quite comfortable in the past because we can more or less get our facts straight. And in my case, I'm perhaps even more reluctant than most to speculate because I seem to always get it wrong. As a teacher of Russian history, a lot of people in the past had asked me what Putin was going to do next, and I've always underestimated him. I've always thought there's just no way he'll be so bold as to, and then he goes and does it. So I'm not much of a prophet. Hopefully I'm a better teacher than that. But let's start off by pointing out that there's some risks to trying to look too far ahead and trying to predict where Europe is going to end up, or anything's going to end up for that matter. But let's specifically go back to 1648 and take a look at how the framers of the Treaty of Westphalia, certainly one of the seminal documents in European history, might or might not have gotten things right or wrong. All right. Hope you enjoyed that. I thought it was funny. Anyway, so if we sort of know what Europe is, even if we haven't exactly managed to define it perfectly, and acknowledge that there's an element of imagination involved in it, where's Europe going? And this is a wide open question, because if I were teaching this class 5 years ago, it would have been pretty obvious that Europe was heading towards greater and greater integration and was probably going to become the world's first superstate, and that the European Union was probably going to engulf the various nationalities in some sort of form of federalism. But that's much more up in the air right now. The Eurozone crisis, Brexit, and related problems have led to, well, a lot of uncertainty about the future of the European experiment, and our recent experiences with COVID have only intensified the confusion about whether or not the European Union is going to become a more integrated system, whether it is going to become more federal, or if it is going to remain more intragovernmental, an organization working between governments. And at the same time, the question of how Europe will influence the rest of the world. It's not unrelated to the question of the European Union, because certainly if the European Union does indeed achieve uh, federal identity, if it does move in the direction of federalism, if it weathers Brexit and the Eurozone crisis and it weathers COVID fairly effectively, it's possible that Europe will continue down the path towards greater and greater integration and may or may not serve as a model for other regions of the world to also take on a sort of supranational identity. It's possible that parts of Africa, parts of Latin America, Southeast Asia might choose to band together, overcoming cultural, political, and historical differences to become a larger player. After all, the European Union is the largest economy in the world, if you count the European Union as one economy, which is the whole arguable point. So depending where Europe goes, it may end up influencing the rest of the world in some very, very unusual ways. At the same time, if the European Union experiment fails, or if it simply stalls, if greater integration is not in the cards for Europe in the short or medium term, it's possible that this will serve also as a marker for the rest of the world that a greater integration of those parts of the world would not be effective and may guide them away from that. Europe also has all sorts of interesting issues to deal with: the rise of right-wing populism, an ongoing refugee crisis, and not to mention COVID. So I will add the confusion of the times to my usual reluctance to play prophet, because I don't know where things are going. All I can offer you is that an understanding of the European past is certainly going to help us understand the European present and figure out the European future, even if we don't want to take the risk of predicting it. All right, well, moving on to conclusions. It's kind of up to you. After all, you've gone through 28 lessons of this stuff. You've read 13 books. You have worked on a poster project that you're hopefully moving right along on. Though don't panic if you're not. I understand that you have developed a broad and deep understanding of European history, so I'll leave it up to you to decide what conclusions you want to draw. Though if you do want to do a little bit more reading, because why not, Norman Davies' Europe, a History is a comprehensive history of Europe. It's also very well written. It takes you from the Neanderthals up to close to the present. And Davies is normally a historian of Eastern Europe, so he provides a great deal of balance there. Well worth reading. David Mason's A Concise History of Modern Europe, Liberty, Equality, Solidarity, now in its 4th edition. This is the kind of book that I might have used as a textbook if this was a more traditional European history class covering more traditional European history dates. But it begins with the French Revolution and takes us forward to the present, as you might guess from the image in the lower right corner of the cover. Brendan Sims' Europe, The Struggle for Supremacy from 1453 to the Present, is an excellent study of the political divisions of Europe and its various efforts to overcome them. So, well worth reading. All right. I will say a final farewell to all of you. I look forward to seeing those of you who are able to participate in our Zoom chat next Tuesday. And I definitely look forward to seeing your final papers and posters. It has, despite everything, been a great semester, and I wish you all the very best. Talk to you later.